is Guy Houston. I'd like to thank you all for coming today. This presentation today is brought by the Sawyer County Historical Society. They're a great group. That's how they got me to talk here today, because I'm a member now. Maybe after the presentation, if you'd like to join the Historical Society, there's forms back there that you could fill out. A little bit about myself. I have a small business in town. It's called Poppin' Tags Thrift Store. My wife, Debbie Houston, she works at Coop's Pizza. We raised 5 children together here in Hayward, and we've been married for 27 years. I grew up on the Chippewa Flowage near that area in Coudray. I tell people when I got older, I moved to the thriving metropolis of Hayward, Wisconsin, and I've been here ever since. My grandfather bought the Hideout in 1959, and our family owned it for over 50 years. There's these boards up here. There's a lot of nice photos of the place. You'll get a chance to look at those later, but I'll be talking about different things, and you'll be able to check those out later. I don't normally talk about the Hideout. Our family did own it for 50 years. My dad took out a huge loan, and he wasn't able to pay it back. So the last thing my dad had me do was to take the keys to Chippewa Valley Bank and turn them in. So it was kind of a sad day. But the LCO Casino, or the LCO, they own the property now, and they've owned it since 2009. In this presentation, I'd like to go over the history of the Hideout, describe the different buildings that make up the estate. I'm just gonna kind of zoom through. I'm sure you've all heard of Al Capone, but it was Prohibition, it was Chicago. He sold beer and alcohol, he had gambling houses, prostitution. Capone was making over $140 million a year in the middle 1920s. That would be like $1.5 billion today. So I'm just gonna kind of start us off on a tour. If you were at the Hideout, I waitered there, bartended, worked the ice cream fountain, took tours. A lot of you in town here know Gary Hilgendorf. He actually tour guided out at the Hideout, and I was the one that showed him how to tour guide. So I still tease him to this day.
He just had a bad accident on his hand. Did you hear that?
I did not.
Slammed between the hook up on the vehicle to the trailer, you know how
Oh,
fun
no.
them are. I said, did you swear? I was picking out my stuff for my hike, but he was getting stuff today.
Oh,
Big
jeez.
old, he said it was horrible, Janice. The pain was horrible. I said, did you swear?
Oh, jeez.
I was-
So if you were at the Hideout and I was giving the tour, the first place that we start, there's an 8-car garage. There were 4 garage doors across the front. If you'd ever been inside when it was a restaurant, it had kind of a high vaulted ceiling. But originally it had a low flat ceiling, and there were 4 gun port holes that they could stand on this flat roof and use this rock as kind of like a false front. This is where Capone would park his cars when he came to the Hideout. There's another picture here that shows the front gate. There's 2 big pillars that you would come through. There's one, the front entrance, and then there's one also on double C. The next thing that we would talk about is up here what they call the gun tower. Yes, it was probably used for a water tower, but what most people don't know is there's an old picture in here, and those pillars that came up, there was flat platforms on top of it where you could sit or stand. And by the 1920s, they had basically logged off the whole area, so it was kind of desolate brush country. And that hill where that gun tower is sitting there, you could see the front gate, you could see the back gate. From there, we would walk down to the main lodge. This is where Al Capone would stay. It's 16-inch thick fieldstone rock. You go inside, and there's some nice early photos here of the way the estate looked with the fancy furniture. There was a local gentleman in town that told me the first time that he went there, he was just amazed. He was on like a Boy Scout field trip, and they were staying out at the hideout. And he said, we had just never seen furniture like this. It was plush, leather. I mean, it was after World War II, and a lot of people were poor. And he's like, it didn't matter because all of us were poor. But when he went inside this lodge, he said it was the most exquisite stuff he'd ever seen. There's a nice fieldstone fireplace. The craftsmanship on the fireplace is just amazing. You know, you see people build fireplaces, all the corners are sharply cut. They cut the...
My family built those. My grandpa and my great uncle built. My grandfather was a master stonemason for the hideout.
Nice.
So,
Well, thank you for sharing.
you kept saying about the stone, I had to say.
Well, the craftsmanship, even on the ends of the building, I mean, nobody cuts rock like that anymore. They take rock and put it in cement and try to make it look flat. They actually cut them. So that fireplace is like 100 tons of rock. There's some spiral staircases in there that are beautiful. You know, I've heard people talk, there's no way Al Capone could walk up those stairs. And I've heard people talk that if we're actually there, and they said when Al would be there and he would be drunk, it'd take a couple of them to get him upstairs. So inside the house, there's a balcony up on the top, and there's 4 bedrooms. There's a closet, there's a bathroom. It's a real nice green tile bathroom with a bathtub, a shower, sink. What most people don't realize is that this lodge in the 1920s had all the modern amenities that we have today. They had running water, they had a toilet, they had electricity. I mean, the REA, the electric, didn't come in until the late 40s. And Capone had electricity and running water in the middle 20s. What else am I missing? One place that you don't get to see is down in the basement. The basement's kind of cool. There was a big stove down there. It was a coal furnace. When my family was there, they used wood. There's a 100-gallon hot water tank for hot showers and your hot bath, 100-gallon tank down there. There's also a huge safe down there. It's probably about this big, about this tall, and maybe this deep. When my grandfather bought the place in 1959, it was locked, and they didn't know how to get into it. And my dad tells me the story on how they ripped the door off, they got the door off, and I'm like, well, what was inside? He's like, I don't know. So I never got to know the answer to that one. But when my grandfather bought the place in '59, it was pretty run down. It had been not cared for well. When he walked in, which would be the front porch, there was kind of a sun porch. You'll see one of the pictures there. He took like 3 steps in and he fell through the floor. That's how bad it was. So over the years, they tried to build it up, manicured the lawns, repaired the buildings. So a lot of it went into it. So when we were done in the house on the tour, we would go outside. The next structure we would see would be, I don't know where I put it. Oh, right here. There's like 8 little stone pillars. That was a gazebo. It had kind of like a roof over it. Then in front of the house, on the back side, there's a huge retaining wall. And there's a little bridge that kind of goes through a valley, small little rock one, and that would wind down to the beach. Where this is, over here is like the parking lot, and then there's another hill. When they were building the estate in the middle 1920s, they didn't have bulldozers and things like they do today. and they took the dirt that was in the parking lot and moved it onto the hill with slip buckets and horses to create kind of a plateau to set the house on. And then they built this retaining wall in front. The lake out front was called Cranberry Lake. If you look on a map, it's called Pike Lake, but during Capone's time, there was wild cranberries, and the locals referred to it as Cranberry Lake. There was 400 acres to the state originally, and it encompassed the lake. You can't own a lake, but if you own all the land around it, nobody can get to it, theoretically. There's another old photo here, and it shows this huge pier going out to the middle of the lake. Now, it's said that Capone had Canadian whiskey flown in, and they would land on the lake. Now, there's many people that say, well, there's no way a plane can land on the lake. There just isn't enough room. But all the trees were logged off. It was desolate brush country. So the plane could get low enough to the ground so it could actually land on the lake. Another picture I have right over here. Below the main lodge is a caretaker's house. And this is where Capone's caretaker would stay. His name was Charlie Allison, and he was there in the 1930s. He was also one of the people that helped build the estate. On the tour, the next place we would go would be the jail. Yes, it's probably an ice house, but there's a big area in the back that they would fill with ice, and then there was a small little room. Now, there's local people that have said that Capone brought some of his enemies from Chicago, and he put them in there. You know, and whatever happened to them, nobody knows. Maybe they ended up in the lake. We don't know. From the jail, we would go down to the barnyard, and there were originally 4 buildings down there. The one on the left is the bunkhouse. There were 4 bunks inside there, and that's where Capone's chauffeurs would stay. Next to it was a little 2-car garage, and inside was a generator. And that was the generator that, for the electricity, for the lights on the property. There was a barn that was built. It was originally brown, but when I grew up, it was red. My grandma came from Chicago, and she always wanted a red barn, so she painted it red. There's a building next to it that was a newer building, a museum building that my dad had built, and it had a lot of neat period items in there, like an old country store, an old car. Another display he had, it was a 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and that was kind of the downfall of Capone. A couple men dressed like police officers walked into this garage. There were 7 men in there, told them to get up against the wall. They thought this was just a simple, raid, and they mowed them down. They figured that each one of those men had over 100 bullets in them. And the nation was outraged, and the federal government said, hey, we just can't let this guy go on anymore. So all the different murders and things that are attributed to Capone, they could never prove any of those. In the end, they got him on tax evasion. Even the estate itself was never in Capone's name. It was in his lawyer's name. And in 1931, he went to prison. He spent a couple of years in Atlanta, and then in 1934, he went to Alcatraz. He got out of prison in 1939, and he died at his estate in Florida in 1947. So that's kind of the history of the buildings that I have. I kind of put some feelers out there to see if anybody would have any information about the place. And I got this letter last night, and nobody's really heard it before, but I'm gonna read it to you. These photos right here are from the late 40s, about 1950. Well, growing up, I always thought, our parents, started the Hideout, ran it for 50 years, and we were the ones that started it. Well, there was actually another gentleman in the late 40s and in the early 50s that had the Hideout open. You could rent a boat for $2 and go out on the lake. For $1, they'd walk you around some of the buildings. There was a small little liquor bar, maybe a table with some liquor on it. His name was William Carlton. And I think in the early, mid 1950s, he left this area. The place was kind of abandoned. And when my grandfather bought it in the late 50s, it was very run down. But this is a letter sent to a business owner in Coudray, and he's talking about his estate, and I'll just read this to you. Your letter regarding the lawnmowers received, but I haven't yet decided whether I want to dispose of them. I might want to use the lawnmowers as I may still be open this summer. This is dated 1952. And they're asking about the lawnmowers because they want to use them, they'll say that here. If it is true, I have the property for sale, but nevertheless, I need both mowers to keep the lawn in shape until the property is sold. I would suggest getting someone with a regular hay mower, as neither of the mowers I have will cut the ball diamond fast enough. And they're talking about the ball diamond in Coudray. Last year I donated $20 to the Coudray Ball Club, but I never received one word of thanks from anyone. Why? You were the only person that out of Coudray that came to my place and rented a boat all last year. It's true many fish froze out last winter, but there were a lot left, and I was glad that they thinned some of them out. I also donated $50 to the building of the firehouse in Coudray, and again, got no thanks. Get this straight, I'm not trying to buy patronage from Coudray by donations, as the boys don't have it, and I don't want to take their money. But the least they could do is say thank you. Now then, I own one of the most notorious places in the U.S., also a beautiful spot, which is located, as you know, in Coudray. You have a booster club, as I understand, but none of these members ever mentioned a word about what could be done or discussed the facts with me about patronizing the place to bring people to Coudray, to visit Al Capone's place, which in turn would bring big business to you and the village of Coudray. The town board of Coudray found it fit to revoke my liquor license. So he's very upset. Thereby putting me immediately out of business after spending many thousands of dollars on the property, plus equipment I purchased to put it with a bang and put Coudray on the map. The deer farm, and he's talking about Bocher's Deer Farm outside of Hayward. Betchers, thank you. Before last year had 65,000 visitors. This is in 1952. Little Bohemia had 50,000 people. Now, how much more popular of a notorious of a name can you get than Al Capone? And the place is right in Coudray in your backyard, and Coudray lets it slip by. I waited many years for the REA, the power company, to come through before I could open this place. It cost me $25,000 doing nothing at all these years, until it finally came through. Then I'd buy boats in Coudray and spend $1,200 in lights to light the place up, and then you revoke my liquor license, for which I had my license, which I had before Joe Christensen and Jim Peterson. These are the two people that owned and were renting the Pixie Club in Coudray. I understand Peterson only leased the Pixie Club from Christensen, but I was made to believe that he bought it from Joe. Joe has no property in Coudray, and Peterson is a newcomer. I pay heavy taxes, and till the town of Coudray takes my liquor license away, why? I now readily see the score why my license was revoked. so he thinks everybody's against him. And I don't know, he kind of continues, but it's kind of funny, his last thing is, well, best of luck, a disgusted resident of Couturier. So he did try to make a goal of it in the 40s and get everybody behind him, but it just didn't fly.
You know why? He should have said he was related to Uncle.
Yeah, there you go. One of the questions people always ask me is, how do you know this is really Al Capone's place? I was like 18 years old, and I was waitering at the Hideout, and my dad said, I want you to wait on this guy. His name is Silver Dollar Divine. And he always tipped in silver dollars. The man was like 90 years old. It was like 30 years ago. And he told me the story on how he drove Capone into this very garage where the dining room was. And it was a great story. And at the end, I walked up to my dad and I said, I mean, you know, it's a great story, but how do you know it's real? And he said, that man knew things about the place that you couldn't possibly know unless you were here. Just an example, in the main house, when you walk in the door and up on the left, that was Capone's room. And there was a switch by the bed there that would turn the outside lights on. And Silver Dollar Divine said, there's a cabinet, it's built into the wall, it's kind of like a dresser. You lift up the lid, and there's some numbers written on there, and those numbers are the numbers for the safe down in the basement. Too bad we didn't know that before we ripped the door off, but... So, well, that's kind of what I have. I'd like to thank the Historical Society for letting me talk. We do have forms if you want to become a member of this Historical Society. We also have a donation bucket back there if you'd like to throw in a couple bucks to help keep the lights on, and they do a wonderful job. I would like to open it up. You guys got any questions? Raise your hand, I'll answer them all.
I don't have a question, but I can verify the Canadian whiskey.
Yeah?
My grandfather, being a Mason, they would actually stay out there because the roads weren't like they are today. And he adored Al Capone because he not only got Canadian whiskey, but he fed them steaks. He fed them better than they could eat at home. So my grandpa, he liked working out there. My grandma probably didn't like it so much.
Well, thank you. I would just add that when Capone was building the estate, they figured he had over 100 people working there, like a year, building the estate. And at that time, he did create a lot of jobs for the area. Who else got a question? Right here.
I have a statement.
Okay.
I knew Charlie Ellison. If that was.
Yep.
That was like, he had a bait shop in Couturier, in that tavern.
Yes.
And he told my dad that Al Capone was such a good guy because when he hired bank robbers, they didn't rob any banks.
Nice. I would just expound on that a little bit. I got a call today from the great-great-grandson of Charlie Allison, and he is going to be writing a book about his grandfather being the caretaker at the Hideout. So he just contacted me today, and we're going to swap a few stories, so thank you for sharing that.
I'm Mike Amlin, by the way.
Nice to meet you.
Pleasure. What are they doing with the place now?
Well, it was sold to LCO in 2009.
Right.
I have not been out there since then. You would have to ask them. I honestly don't know.
Okay.
That was the last time I was there. So,
Is there any chance someone else could own that place?
again, you would
there
have to
be
talk to
enough
them.
Money? Yeah,
I mean, you would have to talk to them.
But you don't think a slight chance?
I don't know.
We were out at the Hideout in 2019, Christmas time, when LCO had a Christmas party over
Okay.
there.
Yeah.
And we were told by the person that was overseeing that they were trying very hard to get the hideout on the National Registry,
Okay,
the historic registry.
okay,
And at that time, they were jumping through hoops and
Okay.
everything to get it.
Yes.
I haven't contacted,
Is
been
it
in
in good
contact,
shape?
fairly good.
They won't let you do a lot of remodeling if you.
No,
get
it would have to be up to
historical.
the time period and other
Yeah, it's really
restrictions.
difficult once they get on the registry.
I know,
next question? Over here,
I'm Susan Austin. I'm probably the person you spoke to regarding our intent to get that place nominated to the National Register of Historic Places. Nancy Cooper is another lady who's helped a lot. She's here in the audience. We created some volunteers out there. We created a LCO Historical Society.
okay,
Frank Zufel here has sat with us in a couple of meetings, just, researching the history. And
Oh, wonderful.
it was brought to the attention of the tribe that this little community group wanted to do something. So we went in and we spent, I think we started in December. Nancy and I were the first ones out there, and we shoveled from the car to the door to get things started. And we eventually got help. We got a little budget. We shoveled and, cleaned up the area as much as we could. But we left, there's you talk about that garage, the 8-car garage. It was turned into a restaurant later. And when it went into bankruptcy, the restaurant didn't operate, but it really fell into disrepair. So that's the condition of the building now. It's full of mold, and it's dangerous to go into. We recently took Dave Anderson out there as far as a developer for the restaurant. He said he wasn't interested in the main lodge, but we're interested in the main lodge. So we'd like to continue the work, and we'd like your support in what we'd like to do. We'd like to see it nominated to the Register of Historic Places. And if we can do more work out there, we'd like to see it open, as a tourist place.
all right, next question,
I do have one question.
okay,
In the basement, there's a large concrete trough. And
yes.
we've often wondered what that is.
Yes, I watched the YouTube video, and I actually have some of the pictures when you guys they had the State Historical Society there.
Oh, yes.
I was told that those were coal bins for the coal stove. When I was a kid, we used it as a wood stove, and that's where we stacked all the wood down there. So when I was getting in trouble, I was down there stacking wood.
Well, a lot of things put you over there.
Yes,
How you doing, guy? Timothy James Colorado. I've bought some stuff from you over at the shop.
nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. My question is, in reference to Al Capone's life, you had said you had briefly spoke of his death, and then you briefly spoke of St. Valentine's Day Massacre. From my memory, I thought that Al Capone was involved in that massacre, and he actually died within the same day.
No.
John.
Supposedly, the hit was ordered by Capone. Capone was never indicted for it. One of the people that they were pretty sure that was involved was Jack McGurn. And I think the year was like 1936. He was found gunned down on Valentine's Day, and they shoved a Valentine's card in his mouth to say, "We know you were one of the guys."
Was it how many men had died that day?
7.
7, and then none of them were they were enemies of Al Capone?
Yes, it was Bugs Moran, who was a rival gang. They were trying to get Bugs Moran, one of the last guys that walked in the building. They thought it was him, but it wasn't him. So he survived for a little while longer.
Wasn't it the people that had shot them, weren't they police officers?
They were dressed as police officers.
Okay.
They weren't actual police officers. They wanted to kind of take them by surprise. Hey, you guys, everybody up against the wall. They thought it was a raid, but no, they were bad guys.
And they died, and Al Capone, where did he die?
He died at his estate in Palm Island in Florida in 1947. Yes. Capone had contracted syphilis. They didn't have the drugs to cure him back then, and they say the last couple years of his life, he was like a 5 or 6 year old because it attacks the brain, and that's what
That's how he
happens.
got out of prison, because of that.
I don't know. He wasn't any problem in prison. I mean, 11 years was a crazy number, but I mean, he was a wanted person by the government, so they threw the book at him.
Yeah.
So, yep, he served his time and then he got out.
How old was he?
He was 48 years old. He was born in 1899.
Do we know how he found, or what drove him to that area? How did he find that piece of property?
People have asked me that. I mean, it's far enough away from Chicago, but still relatively close. In northern Wisconsin, it was very open. You know, there wasn't a lot of people up here, so it was a good place to hide. You know, there's John Dillinger, there's Barker Lake Resort. A lot of gangsters from Chicago, they ended up in the North Woods.
Even in
In Canada.
Barnes like too.
Yep.
That Enchanted Inn, Capone's people ordered that place to be for some private guy, just read about it. For
Okay.
him to take their people there. And Frank picked that out on that picture that was on Facebook. He goes, that's Enchanted Inn that they're talking about in this picture related to Al Capone. He was a real rich person that it got built for him.
Nice.
Yeah.
I heard it was the police chief of Chicago who he had built it for.
I can't, the
Up at
name was,
Enchanted Inn.
the name was there.
That could be. I mean, there's a lot of different
I
places.
think it was a police officer now.
Yep.
But that decoy inn up there too used to be on the other side of the highway. And that was a Al Capone, stop, drop, get, go place
Okay.
too.
Okay. Anyone else have a question? In the back.
Do you know how much your grandpa bought the hideout for?
I think it was around $40,000
Oh,
Yeah, we're talking back.
in the 50s. Yeah. So, and again, it had been on the market. It was probably on the market for, I don't know, 8 years anyways, and nobody wanted it. It was run down. I mean, and you walk through the sun porch and you fall through the roof. And I remember him telling me they couldn't get the furnace to work, and they built a fire and slept on the floor the first couple nights, right in front of the fireplace. And yeah, a lot of the buildings were run down, but
That's poetic. They couldn't get the furnace to work, but they were able to get the fire lit, so they could stay warm. I think that might have been the spirit of life telling them how to live.
yeah, maybe. Anyone else have a question? Yes.
Yeah, I was a tour guide there in 2002 for about 6 weeks, and I could say it was really monotonous because you gave that tour 6 times a day. As you know, so after about 2 weeks, I wanted to quit because it really does get monotonous. You're just repeating the same things, oh, right, guy?
I don't know, you gotta have a little enthusiasm, you know.
But,
Let's take your dumb question and make it into a real question.
I did a story here, Susan, you were out there, the State Historical Society was out there, and they were looking at, I don't know exactly what they were going to put it on some kind of classification, or maybe it was a step before the national designation, I don't know, but they were out there, and there was one of the state historians said he thought that the hideout was the place where Capone actually planned the St. Valentine's Massacre.
Well,
have you heard that before?
It's funny that you say that, because that gentleman that's the great-great-grandfather of Charlie Allison, he said that his grandpa told him that there was some guy that I had never heard of before that was a member of Capone's gang, and they actually planned it there at the hideout. Now, I had always read that it was planned in Florida, because when the actual act went down, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, Capone planned it perfectly because he was in Florida with a high, I forget who it was, like the mayor of something. So he was at their office. He's like, well, how could I be doing this? I'm down here in Florida. But, so, I mean, there's so much legend about the place.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, I mean, you know, if you're 80 years old, you were in the 40s. You know, if you were in Capone's time, you'd have to be like 120 years old. So all the information that we could have gathered is already gone. So now it's all, okay, I think this is so, I think this is so. And the grandson of Charlie Allison, we were talking about that, and you almost have to get like 2 or 3 stories from 2 or 3 different people that say the same thing. So, okay, that could actually be true then. But, you know, everyone has like a different story, then you just really don't know.
But speaking of stories, the last book on Capone, I know the library gave it to me, and I was supposed to do an article about it, and I didn't. But one of the stories in that book, is a recent book, is that the priest from St. Francis coming over to the hideout at night, actually, and surprising the guys. There was some guys, and they didn't really appreciate him coming over, but they actually gave him a donation, and then told them never to come back. Have you heard of that story?
Well, I actually read the book that you're talking about. You can pick it up at Walgreens. I'm walking by Walgreens. They got a bunch of books on the history of Wisconsin. So I page through it, and I see the thing on the hideout. The stories in there are, I don't know. They had one about Louis Spray and about how he caught his fish and how he never caught it. That this gangster that was on the land sold him the fish for $50. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if any of that's true. Probably not though.
Did Dalton Hessel
But I made it for a
write
good
the
story.
book? Did Dalton Hessel write the book?
Yes.
What was the name of the contractor that, her family that built it? Sawyer.
Boils.
B-Y, B-O-Y-L-E?
Correct, B-O-Y-L-E.
B-O-Y-L-E.
Yeah, boils.
Thank you.
Reference again to the St. Valentine's Day massacre. Who were the men who performed the hit or who shot?
They were members of Capone's gang.
They don't know names?
I mean, you can find all the information you want about Al Capone on there. I'm just kind of focusing more on this because all that information is readily available.
Who they were.
I just don't know them off the top of my head. I'd have to look them up too.
I don't think people talk back then about who did what.
Probably not.
Go to silence.
Yep. Anybody else got a question?
Yeah,
Yes.
about 15 or 20 years ago, we went to a kind of a regional historical society meeting up in Hurley. And unfortunately, our speaker was called away on family business, but she was Ralph Capone's widow. Not Al, but Ralph Capone's widow, and she lived in Hurley, so.
Yep. He had a bar there. He worked
family
for
was up
Capone.
there.
He also got put away for a while for tax evasion. But yeah, he was kind of one of Capone's workers. But yes, he was popular and he was in the early area. Yes.
So my sister and I, we grew up in White Bear Lake, and in White Bear Lake, Capone was also Ma Barker and Pretty Boy Floyd, I think, and Al Capone also hung out there in the 20s and 30s when White Bear was kind of a
That could very
Resort.
well be possible.
yeah.
Again, I know more about this stuff. Yeah. Yes.
Johnny Moore has had the Royal Lair on off the Chippewa Flowage.
Yep.
And he was one of the gangsters. His real name was Claude Maddox.
Okay.
And he was one of Capone's main lieutenants. He ran the Cragen district in Chicago.
Okay.
His little gang was absorbed into Capone's gang. And one of the getaway cars from the St. Valentine's Day Massacre was found near his hideout in the district, so they figured Claude Maddox likely had something to do with the massacre too, and he was friends with Machine Gun Jack McGurn, and so, and then Cal Johnson, who caught the world record muskie, he was living in Chicago at the time, and he was witness to the aftermath of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. He lived really close to where the massacre occurred, and he was a writer for one of the Chicago papers. And soon as the shooting took place, Cal Johnson zipped right over there because he was really close, and he had his young toddler son with him, Phil Johnson, and I guess he didn't wanna leave Phil at home alone. So Cal brought his young son, Phil Johnson, to the site, and the people were still all shot up and laying there. And one of the guys that got shot up, I think, was Frank Gusenberg, and he survived for a while, but he wouldn't rat on anybody, and then he eventually died. But Cal Johnson's son, Phil Johnson, says, Daddy, how come all these people are on the ground sleeping? Because he didn't understand that they were actually dead. And then another story, Ray Blank, one of the old guides from the flowage, goes way back. He knew Doc Stevens, and I guess that was either Al Capone's dentist or a dentist that Al Capone knew. And Ray told me that Doc Stevens in his younger days would fly Canadian whiskey in. He'd fly up to Canada with a float plane, come in with his lights off so he wouldn't be spotted, load up, and he'd land by the dock on Cranberry Lake and unload for Al Capone. So that was another story that I heard, that Doc Stevens was one of the people that flew whiskey in.
Thank you.
And he was his dentist.
Did
Nice.
Did your family find any artifacts of any sort? What
Well,
left over?
when I was a kid, I had a metal detector. When my parents weren't looking, I was running around trying to find things at the place. I found a couple coins with bullet holes shot through them. My dad surmised that they were, like on the retaining wall, throwing coins up and shooting at them. On the backside of the lake, I found some old slot machine parts. I don't know, there were a lot of cool things. Just before you come in the front gate, on the right-hand side, there were a couple old cars out there. One of them was like a 1920s Hupmobile. We grabbed some little parts off of there. But yeah, there was all sorts of fun things to look at. And then there's always the story that, wherever Capone was, there was underground tunnels. So there was always talk about that. Supposedly there was one there. It was never found. I have a couple good ideas where I thought they might be, but if my dad saw me with a shovel digging a big hole, probably wasn't gonna be too impressed, but.
GPR now.
Yeah,
Stacking firewood,
yes.
Has anybody ever got to dive in the lake?
I believe LCO had some people go out there and dive the lake. You would have to ask them what they found, but, I don't know the answer to that. Do you wanna answer that?
There are two stories about that. We've asked ourselves, here's Nancy. We've asked ourselves about any kind of scuba diving, and we heard that there were some parts found, like you say, the old slot machines and stuff like that. But we're more interested in the bodies.
What about the plane?
Why don't you just let 'em-
No plane
you can just let them decompose too, and just let them be.
Okay, so that was.
They sink far when they have cement around them.
Yeah.
Treasure would probably be the only thing to search for.
But when we were out there, we were getting ready to open the building. A couple of things happened to us. And we were so busy cleaning and bringing in period furniture that we could find. A lot of my stuff is still up there. I haven't been back yet for, over a year.
Okay.
But when we were closing up each evening, I had a hard time keeping workers there past dark. And I had a young couple. I operate the Healing to Wellness Court. It's like the drug court that you would hear about in Sawyer County. So we had some volunteers up there. And this young couple, I thought they were gonna stay with me late. And they didn't. The guy, I think he got mad at his girlfriend. And pretty soon the girlfriend is packing up. And it's way past dark time. Packing up, and he wouldn't come back into the building. So I ended up getting left there all by myself, and I had to go around and turn off all the lights.
Oh, geez.
And I usually have a practice of when I'm working, I don't like people working by themselves at a
Right.
place after dark,
Smart.
just for safety.
Yes.
Yep.
And it was really unsettling to have to go through the building and turn off all the lights. And then I locked myself in. I don't know how I did that.
You didn't.
I ended up climbing through the window to get out the door.
Oh, jeez.
Out the outside door. But, my grandchildren came to help in the end, and we stayed up all night working, like for a couple of nights. So we just slept in front of the fireplace, just like the other people
Nice.
said that they slept. But I wasn't afraid, you know, I had to be strong for the kids. And we all just slept together. But on the last day, when we were finishing up, the kids from Minneapolis and my family, well, they wanted to take all these pictures. So we took the pictures, and after, my granddaughter came to me and she said, Grandma, look at all these orbs, all these lights on the outside of the building, through the whole property. All these lights are like blue spiritual lights or something. It's not part of the camera, it's not a defect in the camera. We, you know, we still have the pictures.
Ghosts out there.
Right.
And when we were getting ready to have tribal council come in to see the work that we were doing, we ended up taking pictures, and this one Indian guy that worked with us, Gary Butler Sr., he was standing there, and I don't know if Nancy was there yet. I took some pictures, and all the people that were standing there were brown Indian people. But in the picture, there's a lady, an elderly white lady, she's looking up, and so are we. We're looking up at that second balcony, and nobody was with us except the Indian people. This lady is an elderly lady. She's looking up just the way that we are. And I showed that picture to the tribal council. Well, Gary Claus, that little guy, he will not go up there. He will not go up there.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, thanks. Does anybody got any other questions? Yes?
Did your grandmother run the resort for a while? It seems to me many years ago, there was like on Discover Wisconsin, and she was showing.
I've got a photo of her right here. Here's my grandma in 1981 giving tours.
Yeah, okay.
When my grandfather bought the estate, he put it in her name, and she owned it until she died in 2003. But yeah, she was the tour guide.
Okay.
Yep, but she was no nonsense.
And she was in your little knick-knacky store there too.
Yep, we had a gift shop,
Yeah,
and she
the
was
gift
there.
shop, and
Yep.
I talked with her all the time.
Yep.
And I asked a question once about a picture she had there in the gift store. And it was on a baseball diamond. And this picture, and when I asked if that could be Al Capone's grandson, she didn't answer me. But when we went back, cause we went there quite a bit, as you know, and we went more early, that picture was taken down.
There is a famous photo taken in the 20s of Al Capone with his son, Sonny Capone. But, you know, he was born in 1918, 1919, so he would have been pretty old.
This is more recent, this kid on the.
I don't know which one that is. Yes?
Will these wonderful collages be on display at the Sawyer County Historical Society?
Well, you're just gonna have to go there and see. Anybody else have any questions? I got a whole bunch of them. Well, I would like to thank you very much for coming.
It was so awesome.
There are refreshments and treats in the room before you go outside. If you want to pick up application for Sawyer County Historical Society, if you want to drop a donation, it's all good. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.